Number 5. Their relationship. Now the movies portray Ed and Lorraine Warren as a perfect couple. A pair of demonologist ghost hunters that nothing could possibly stand between. No demons, no spirits, no troubles in the marriage. Well, in reality, there are claims, pretty substantial ones, that the relationship wasn't quite as picturesque as the movies made it out to be. The pair lived with a girl named Judith Penny, someone who is notably absent through the movies. Judith later in life revealed some truly shocking secrets and allegations against the pair. She suggested that Ed acted violently to Lorraine behind closed doors and claims that on more than one occasion he struck her. Penny said in a recording to The Hollywood Reporter, "Some nights I thought they might end each other's lives." Of course, the Conjuring movies are nothing like that, and portray them as a fairy tale storybook couple almost. It's a very stark contrast. The production company was strong-armed into showing the couple as loving as possible in a deal by Lorraine Warren for the films after Ed had passed away. A producer for the Conjuring films, Tony DeRosa Grund, spoke out against Ed Warren in an email to top Warner Brothers executives, referring to him as a violent husband and a criminal. He said, "Lorraine enabled, she knowingly allowed an illegal relationship to continue for 40 years. They lied to the public." Now we've got lots of videos on Ed and Lorraine Warren, whether you're a fan or a hater. We've got lots on the topic. But if that's not your jam, we've got cryptids, conspiracies, true crime, fake crime, aliens, pretty much anything scary under the sun. Top 5 Scaries got a video for. So click on through, find something to scream at, and subscribe, but do that when the credits roll, okay? We worked hard on this video. Number 4. Judith Penny. Perhaps the most serious claim regarding the pair had nothing to do with ghosts or spirits, but it was the nature of the relationship with Judith Penny and Ed Warren. In 2017, evidence surfaced from Judith herself to suggest that the movies left out one of the biggest details of their lives, that Ed Warren was involved in an extramarital relationship with an underage girl. Judith has sworn that she spent 4 decades living in the Warrens' house as Ed's lover, but that the relationship began when she was 15. The claim goes on to state that the couple told people she was their niece, or a poor girl that they had taken in since she had nowhere else to go. In 1963 actually, Penny was arrested and taken into custody after a concerned citizen who noticed this reported the nature of their relationship to local police. She was ordered by the court to attend a delinquent youth office for a month. Penny would tell that Ed would pick her up from school and drive her to these meetings. Now obviously these are substantial claims and serious allegations. These didn't come out until after Ed had passed, but perhaps the most concerning piece of evidence was a bizarre contract Lorraine demanded that New Line Cinema follow. This strange deal insisted that Lorraine serve as a consultant on all of the films, which makes sense, they're about her. Where it gets a bit odd is restrictions that said the films could not show the Warren characters engaging in any criminal acts, could not show Ed Warren committing any extramarital acts, or romantically involved with younger people. Very suspicious. One executive at New Line said they had never seen a deal like that before in their career. It certainly raises a very uncomfortable question: why would these things specifically be demanded not to be done? Number 3. They wanted to be artists. You know, believe it or not, the pair of legendary demonologists had actually not always planned on investigating the occult and the unknown. Does anyone really? You can't really go to school for that. When the two had married, they both had believed that they were going to make a career out of being artists. Ed Warren had gone to art school at New Haven, and Ed Warren began a modest career trying to paint landscapes, but he was not finding much success. He felt that he lacked a subject that he believed really spoke to people and made a connection with people, and he was struggling over this. As beautiful as a Connecticut landscape is, it just was not landing with people and he wasn't selling enough. He had held a long-standing interest in the supernatural and paranormal after an incident as a young boy where he encountered a ghostly spirit in his own home. So he decided that for his future endeavors, he would make a collection of paintings of local haunted houses. He would read in the newspaper for stories of haunted houses, then drive up to them, paint the houses outside, and then offer the paintings to the homeowners in exchange for information and intel about the haunting. He and Lorraine actually sort of got their start as paranormal investigators this way. They spent 5 years on the road, traveling as a pair of nomadic haunted house painters turned investigators, in which is no doubt one of the most unique ways to begin a career. Initially, Lorraine was more of a skeptic than a true believer, believing that most of the people they met and spoke to were just people with overactive imaginations. Obviously, she changed her tune a little bit as they made a storied career out of this. After spending weeks that turned to months and years on the road, Lorraine said she felt the similarities between each case despite them all occurring in different states and communities, and saw a beauty in them exploring the world while Ed would be there covered in paint to explain the spirit world to their hosts. Number 2. They met real young. For a pair so closely connected to the spirit world, perhaps it was fate that would bring the two together as soulmates. Ed worked at the local movie theater in town and Lorraine would frequent it. One of her friends had told her there that there was an usher there that she thought Lorraine might take a fancy to. Lorraine wasn't much interested in boys at all, and it said that she was solely focused on her schoolwork and found most young men too rough around the edges. But when she bought a ticket, she recalled being charmed by the spiffy, energetic young usher, one Ed Warren. He had his hair coiffed and his pants creased, which in 1943 was the absolute fanciest a youngster could possibly look. Ever the gentleman. After the movie, Ed offered to walk all 3 girls home, but first offered to buy them all a Coke. Listen to that, he's like a regular Archie Andrews, this guy. He dropped a hearty 25 cents getting all 3 girls a soda, which again was the biggest display of wealth anyone in 1943 could possibly have shown off. He walked Lorraine's friends home, and when it was just him and Lorraine, she thought that it might look a bit salacious if he walked her home. She elected to walk herself home to the destination. Ed, ever the gentleman, nodded and took off. Lorraine claims that when she saw Ed walk away, she didn't see him as a 16-year-old, but rather claims she saw him fully grown, saw him exactly as he would appear as an adult. She wrote in her diary that day that she found the man she was going to marry. Was it fate that had brought them together? Was it a divine purpose? Or were there just not that many cute boys in Connecticut at the time? Ed would be sent over to serve during World War II during the Navy, and he married Lorraine pretty much as soon as he stepped back in Connecticut, and the pair married when they were only 19 years old and remained married to the end of their days. Number 1. They never charged money. Now, over the years, Ed and Lorraine Warren have received their fair share of controversy, accusations, and allegations about their intentions. There were more than a few people over the years who accused them of being little more than charlatans and grifters who were exploiting money out of people who just didn't know any better. The thing is though, while there is absolutely a conversation and a discussion to be had about whether or not they were wildly exaggerating cases or intentionally adding and stretching stories out to make them more exciting for better books and better Hollywood movies, the thing is, as paranormal investigators, they never once charged money for their services. Like I mentioned before, usually their way in the door was to offer a painting. They never asked for money out of the residents of any of their haunted houses or cases that they'd investigated. They probably just asked for the exclusive film rights to the story, if anything, and that's probably not even a joke. The way they mostly made money was by traveling to colleges and universities and giving lectures on the occult and paranormality. Ed and Lorraine, despite calling themselves demonologists, and that being the term most commonly associated with them, insisted that they were educators before they were paranormal investigators. That was their main goal. They had always wanted to make people aware of what had existed beyond the veil of our world. They had a goal of discouraging people from getting involved in what they didn't understand, saying that most of the people they met were young college-age couples, and they had hoped that they could steer them towards a more righteous path. This is why they founded the New England Society for Paranormal Research, to uncover mysteries, and ended up working on 100 cases since its founding. Now today, the foundation is run by the Warrens' daughter Judy and their son-in-law Tony Spera, who has taken upon himself to maintain the Warrens' legacy, including running their famed Museum of Haunted Objects. It's closed right now, hopefully just for some rearrangement. Hopefully Annabelle didn't break loose or nothing, but it is hopefully reopening back soon, so you can get back to peering at that collection of haunted relics and cursed objects.
In 5th place, their origins in the profession. Honestly, before today, I never really dug too much into the personal lives of Ed and Lorraine Warren, preferring to focus my interest on their professional work, and only really knowing about their daughter Judy from the rare time they mentioned her in one of their books, and her husband because of all the rare footage he's publicized since Ed and Lorraine's death. Outside of the Hollywood romanticizing, which I promise I'll touch on eventually, how did Ed and Lorraine actually fall into this line of work? So Lorraine was 9 when she first saw auras. She thought everyone saw them, but found out quickly otherwise when she brought it up at her Catholic school, when she compared the lights surrounding the Mother Superior and Sister Joseph, and was told immediately to never talk of what she saw ever again, learning to, hide her gifts or joke it off. Ed, on the other hand, grew up in a haunted house. He'd look into closets and see faces, one specifically of an old lady. The temperature in his room would drop and he would hear footsteps and heavy breathing. When he brought it up to his father, he was told that, there's a logical explanation for everything, and just leave it at that. So they both did their very best to try and ignore their gifts, wanting to live normal lives, But the universe drew them together and had different plans. Ed had a near-death experience while serving in the Navy during World War II when the ship he was on collided with an oil tanker in the North Atlantic. A fire erupted and all of the men on the ship had to jump overboard. As Ed was in the icy water, he prayed for help and was soon rescued, believing it to be from cosmic interference. So after that experience, he returned home and asked Lorraine to marry him, and they got married almost immediately. After the war, Ed took up a profession as a fine arts painter, with the duo traveling from fair to fair to sell their wares. And eventually this became helpful during the beginnings of their work. They would research houses they believed to be haunted, and then, go to that house. After Ed would paint the domicile, he would hand the painting to Lorraine, who would knock on the door and offer the homeowners the painting as, their ticket into the house. Once she struck up a conversation with the homeowner, they would learn more about the property and hauntings, if there were hauntings, that is. At one house, which already had, some local notoriety as a supernatural hotspot, Lorraine went into spontaneous trance and claimed that this is where she learned not to fear death. I thought there was more to that. In fourth place, we have the White Lady hoax. Just so we all have the same context going into this, the White Lady is the name of the ghost that haunts the Union Cemetery in Easton, Connecticut. So most locals believe her to be the ghost of Harriet Seeley, whose young son passed shortly after being born, with Harriet herself passing soon after. Legend believes she may have died in hopes of finding her son, and still wanders their final resting place searching him out. Other folks believe the White Lady is the ghost of a woman from the 1940s who killed her husband and later herself and is, doomed to wander the graveyard. Her physical description is the one thing that remains consistent. She is a young woman wearing a white dress with dark hair. So, me if I was wearing white, which will never happen here. I promise you that. It seems as if she enjoys scaring the daylights out of the living, which, once again, my kind of gal. Many who have witnessed her believe that they have almost hit her with their vehicle, only to find no trace of her once they pull over. Others claim they have often seen her hovering slightly above the ground around the cemetery, going back and forth amongst different gravestones. Now, Ed Warren was obsessed with her and has gone on record as being, determined to capture footage of her on film. Once he was able to do so, he kept the tape for himself. Yeah, he hoarded that tape like it held the secrets to the universe, or, like he was the US government with all the proof they have of alien life. He allowed a select few people to view it while, it was being held in his personal archives, and none were ever allowed to further analyze it on their own time. I'm raising an eyebrow right now in suspicion. And once again, if I had a red flag, I'd be waving it right here. So, since the passing of both Ed and Lorraine, their son-in-law, Tony Spera, has released the footage in its entirety to YouTube. The tape shows an apparent white human figure moving behind some tombstones. Similar to videos of UFOs, Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster, the figure is at that perfect distance and resolution so a shape can be seen, but we don't have any details that could lead to a definitive identification. A woman named Judith Penny, who I will discuss in more detail later, has said she helped Ed maintain his reputation as a ghost hunter. So what does that mean? So when he claimed to have captured the White Lady on tape in the summer of 1990, after camping out in the graveyard for a week, allegedly, Judith was the mystical being spotted on tape, masking herself with a white sheet.
Number 3. How psychic is she? Naturally, Lorraine's psychic abilities came into some scrutiny. That does make some sense. You claim you're psychic, people are gonna ask you all sorts of annoying questions like, are you really? No one just trusts you. Interestingly, even Lorraine herself didn't fully believe in the paranormal until she made a career of it. In the beginning, Lorraine was wary of just about everyone they had met, and believed that the people who were reporting these hauntings or describing strange things in their home were just speaking with an overactive imagination, or were just making things up for attention. And save that point for later in the video, because that's gonna come up again. It was only after working several cases where she started to notice recurring trends between everything that they'd worked on and all the things that these cases were telling her that she started to believe that what she was doing was real and there was a grander connection to it all. After they started to become more well known for their work on the cases that inspired the Conjuring or the Amityville horror, there was some outcry from people who said that Lorraine was faking this and the two of them were faking it. So to quiet her critics, Lorraine had herself tested by a doctor named Dr. Thelma Moss, who is a parapsychologist studying abilities outside the human experience, researching things like extrasensory perception, the spirit world. Lorraine went for extensive psychic testing, and the doctor had reported that Lorraine was an above average clairvoyant. Ooh, put that on the fridge. In the 80s, Lorraine and Ed were renowned enough as psychics that even law enforcement officers took note of it, and had actually requested for Lorraine Warren's aid on a string of missing persons cases, believing the help of a psychic would be just what they needed, a move that was seen as a bit controversial at the time. Number 2. Their relatives carry on their legacy. Although Ed and Lorraine Warren themselves unfortunately are no longer with us, they worked hard to ensure to pass on their ideas, their teachings, to ensure that their legacy would outlast their mortal forms. And I mean, that's kind of if you believe they're really gone. I mean, these people worked with spirits their whole life. They've got to be out there somewhere, their spirits guiding, right? In 1952, Ed and Lorraine founded the New England Society for Psychic Research as a way of tracking and documenting their cases. As well, famously, just like shown in the movies, Ed and Lorraine kept a magnificent museum of all the cursed relics, horrible things, and demonic objects that they'd encountered over the years in their cases, including the infamous Annabelle amongst many, many others. She doesn't quite look like how she does in the movies though, she's a little more raggedy in real life. But with Ed and Lorraine no longer around to run the society, it was now left in the hands of their daughter Judy and their son-in-law Tony Spera, who has taken it upon himself to maintain the Warrens' legacy and is a demonologist and paranormal investigator of his own volition. He inherited their museum of cursed objects and he takes care of their most dangerous ones, maintaining the rituals necessary to keep them cleansed and pure. Now, unfortunately, the museum is currently closed at the time of this video, but Mr. Spera is working to get it reopened to the public. Annabelle does tour though, if you're ever looking to catch her in your town. She's got a good agent, I guess, and she makes appearances all over at paranormal conventions. You can take a photo with her. She takes lots of photos with fans. She doesn't really answer too many questions though. She's not a big talker. Spera isn't the only of the Warrens' relatives trying to carry on their legacy, however. Their nephew, one John Zaffis, who I've mentioned a few times on this channel actually, was inspired by stories and tales of his demonologist uncle as a boy and followed in their path, becoming a paranormal investigator himself and opening his own museum of haunted relics just outside of his home, just like his uncle. You gotta wonder if there's any members of the extended Warren family who don't have a museum of cursed relics and if they feel a bit left out. Zaffis' museum, much like the Warrens, is blessed and anointed with holy water and monitored closely by a priest to make sure none of the haunted relics dwelling inside it worm their way loose. Number 1. Maybe it was all fake though. Well, it feels really wrong to end the video on this point, but it also felt really wrong to not mention it all either, and I thought it was either number 5 or number 1, and I settled on number 1 being a better ending. I believe any good skeptic or paranormal enthusiast must always ask themselves the toughest question when it comes to anything supernatural. Was it real, or were they just making it all up? Okay? Every Mulder needs a Scully asking those questions. It's been a long-running debate and discussion as to whether or not Ed and Lorraine were really demonologists, or if they were just a pair of very charismatic storytellers, and it was a bit of a complicated ruse to sell a bunch of books and get some movies made. Now, since the Warrens have passed, several stories and more doubt has begun to creep out, decrying the Warrens as nothing more than grandiose storytellers. For one example, the lawyer in the Amityville horror case, who was representing Ronald DeFeo, the assailant who slayed his family, admitted that a majority of the story involving the infamous haunting was all just that, just a story generated under his own admission that he made up over a bottle of wine with the Lutz family. That's the family that moved into the alleged haunted house, as a way of cooking up the story a little bit in the hopes of getting a retrial for Ronald DeFeo. Another example that came out was the haunting in Connecticut case. Very famous case. The Warrens wrote a book on it. There were a few movies made. The Warrens' book detailing their experiences with that case was called In a Dark Place. It was co-authored by Ray Garton, who was a horror novelist who was asked to help out and punch up the novel a little bit. Garton had a bit of an issue though, because he said when he was interviewing the family involved in the case, he found that their stories didn't match up, and frequently they were contradicting each other describing the haunting. Garton asked Ed Warren for advice on what he should do about it, and Ed gave him this response saying, "Oh, they're crazy. You've got some of the story, just use what works and just make the rest up and just make it scary." Or what about the Enfield case, the basis for the second Conjuring film, which was greatly exaggerated, as the Warrens only arrived for a single day, uninvited, and were then sent away by the family. Ed Warren told another investigator working the case that we could make some serious money off of this one. And seeing how much money the Conjuring franchise has made, well, it seems like you don't need to be a psychic to see that maybe the truth was getting in the way of a good story just a little bit. Real or not, you cannot deny that the Warrens have a lasting legacy, an entertaining one, and are fascinating to read about. And no doubt we'll be discussing them on this channel and in the world larger for years and years to come.
Number 5 on this list is the relationship. As we'll look at a bit later in this video, Ed and Lorraine's relationship might not have been all it was cracked up to be. The couple that inspired The Conjuring have often been talked about as being one of the greatest married couples ever. In the movie The Conjuring, the pair very clearly have each other's back, and it's clear that there's a deep foundation of love between them. Or at least, that's how the movie likes to show it. Real life may have been a lot different. Judith Penny was someone who would have had access to the Warrens' relationship and would have been able to see it behind closed doors. We'll get into why that is the case later and explain who Judith Penny is, but for now, just take my word for it. Apparently, she has come out and said that the Warrens' beautifully loving relationship that we saw on screen is all a bunch of baloney. In truth, Ed was extremely violent and toxic to Lorraine. This toxicity would manifest itself in many different forms. Oftentimes, it would come out in harsh, verbal abuse that felt as if it was coming right from thin air, totally unprovoked by Lorraine. However, occasionally this would manifest into physical abuse. Judith has come out and said that one particularly bad evening she saw Ed backhand Lorraine across the face with all his might, and apparently she lost consciousness. Now, Lorraine wouldn't just sit there and take the abuse either, she would fire her own shots as well. Judith thought that some evenings one of them wouldn't even be waking up the next morning based on how much they were fighting and how intense it would get. This has all the telltale signs of a horribly toxic relationship. The pair were just very good at hiding it. Number 4 on this list is the Amityville horror story. I feel like you've heard this story before, guys. Arguably the most famous of all the Ed and Lorraine Warren cases, this singular case launched the pair onto the main stage as being some of the biggest demonologists and paranormal investigators on the planet. Therefore, it was incredibly important to their image and their brand that this story was believed by the public. Fact of the matter is, though, they made the entire thing up. Ronald DeFeo Jr. was the spark behind this entire story. In 1974, Ronald gunned down his entire family in that home for seemingly no reason. He was later sentenced to life in prison for his crimes and died behind bars at age 69. These murders were brutal, though, and were heard nationwide. That's why when the next family to move in claimed the house was haunted, it actually got a ton of attention. The family said that slime would appear all over the place with no apparent origin. Things would swing open and objects would fly around the room. The house itself could simply not warm up and would stay incredibly cold for weeks on end. The media got wind of this, and so did Ed and Lorraine. They went into this place and went on to have their most successful case ever, ultimately concluding that the house is in fact haunted. However, this just simply was never true. The family's lawyer later came out and said that they collectively made up this story together and thought it would get a lot of traction over a few bottles of wine. The Warrens' initial success literally started by a few drunk people deciding they were gonna pull a trick on everyone. Even though this news came out, the Warrens have always held strong onto the fact that the house was in fact haunted.
In third place, we have Catholicism as an undercurrent. This is probably the only thing that has always bugged me, and while it might be less of like a secret in the gotcha sense, allow me to explain. Hauntings Ed and Lorraine spoke about were caused by people who refused to conform to traditional family values. Only people who submitted to the patriarchy and the church could be safe in their eyes. Their 1980 book, The Demonologist, kind of explains it all. That Ouija boards would get you haunted, but so would reading books about witchcraft, owning an image of a non-Christian deity, or attending conscious-raising groups. The horror in Amityville was supposedly aggravated when the unlucky homeowners engaged in the unholy pagan practice of, meditation. Addiction, depression, and disobedient children were all satanic. Hate, rage, despair, misery, drunkenness, and a sense of worthlessness will attract the demonic in a snap, according to Ed. One story in The Demonologist centers on a young woman who succumbed to evil after being fornicated with against her will. I do own this book, and I remember that not sitting super well with me. It was essential not just to stick with the status quo, but to be satisfied, with Ed going on record as saying, that a happy home is one's best defense, and even the most powerful exorcism will be effective only if you keep up an emotional atmosphere that does not attract such entities. And while I do believe this to an extent, not so far as Ed does. That atmosphere would involve going to church, by the way, saying that once a week was a good start. Yeah, I don't go to church. When you really think about it, the Warrens' entire basis of work kind of relied on victim blaming, evil that could, only happen to people who were already evil themselves. So personally, I don't agree with this whatsoever. Bad things do happen to good people, and not just because they don't follow Catholicism doesn't make someone evil. If you don't see what I'm seeing, allow another quote from Ed to help clarify things. People who do negative or patently unnatural things are essentially doing the devil's work for him, and actually attract negative spirits to their side. Ed Warren Warren was the homophobic brand of Catholic. Yes, I'm fully aware that not all Catholics observe this, and while most do not, Ed fell under that specific strain that sadly does. As a queer gal who didn't fully learn this until today, it kind of broke my heart that people who were so open to helping others and the unknown could be so close-minded. In second place, we have fraudulent items in the museum. So Ed and Lorraine were investigating numerous cases from the 1950s until they passed, right? And they founded like a whole society devoted to the research and investigation of the paranormal in 1952. Not to forget their entire museum attached to their home dedicated to objects from their cases. So, explain to me how their website only has 10 public case files, and why so much from the museum looks like leftovers from a spirit Halloween. Doesn't anyone else find it pretty suspicious that we only get details from their really big news cases, while artifacts from other, lesser cases are barely a footnote and have no story or witnesses attached? So, in one corner of the Warrens Occult Museum is the skin of a tiger that is said to have killed 33 people in India while possessed by a demonic spirit. But yet, when I try to research this were-tiger, I find no account of any reportings in history about such a case, outside of, their quotes, or any offers from Ed and Lorraine to go into detail about any events leading to how it came into their possession. Seriously, take a look at some of this stuff. Given what I know about modern day Satanism, that idol looks like a papier-mâché alien mock-up. Well, most folks who practice Satanism don't actually pray to any sort of idol, or to the devil himself. But sure, for a moment I'll pretend like that's real and move on to the, black magic skull, which just looks like a cheap haunted house prop for a glow-in-the-dark room. Ditto for the, chilling masks. You know what, actually that's a lie. I've seen cosplayers make better masks. I'm not going to even try to rationalize the skull with horns or the recreation of the Witch of Monroe. Y'all don't need to see me fuming right now. In first place, their personal life. So if you watch the film franchise, you'd think Ed and Lorraine had a pretty ideal, wholesome, perfect Americana family style life. But the reality isn't so shiny or pure, despite what, they preach all the time. In the early 1960s, Ed Warren initiated a relationship with an underage woman with Lorraine's knowledge. Ed was in his mid-30s when he met Judith, who was exactly half his age. Yucky. Having not yet gained enough fame as a self-trained demonologist to pay the bills, Ed was working as a city bus driver in Monroe, Connecticut, while Judith was a student at Central High School in the nearby town of Bridgeport, who, conveniently rode his bus route. The two began an amorous relationship, according to a legal declaration from Judith in November of 2014. Heck, by 1963, she had moved into the Warrens' home, and for the next 40 years, she had a sexual relationship with Ed with Lorraine's knowledge. That same year, Judith was arrested after someone reported her relationship with Ed to local police, because, busybodies everywhere. And she spent a night in the North End prison in Bridgeport, while police tried to persuade her to sign a statement admitting to the affair. After she refused to cooperate, she was ordered by the court to report to a delinquent youth office for the next month. So, Ed, being the great guy he was, picked her up from school every week and drove her to the mandated meetings. Judith claimed that Ed told her many times that she was the love of his life. The Warrens explained her presence in the home as a niece or a poor girl who they had taken in out of charity and who helped them with office tasks. And she was mentioned in a lot of their books as being, their secretary, most notably in The Demonologist, which I've already quoted a couple times today. What do you know? I own a copy. In May of 1978, while in her 30s, Judith became pregnant with Ed's child, and Lorraine persuaded her to have an abortion because the birth of a child could become public and any scandal could ruin the Warrens' business. Now, if that wasn't awful enough, Judith has also claimed that Ed was, on occasion, physically offensive to Lorraine. Judith described one night in particular where she saw Ed slap Lorraine so hard she lost consciousness. Early on, she said, she witnessed him backhand his wife. Well, it might be easy to dismiss all these claims as, hooey, or someone trying to make something out of nothing. There's an interesting element from Lorraine that kind of proves this to be true. So when Lorraine signed on to consult on the Conjuring movies, she got a contract that states that the movies will not feature negative information about the Warrens, mentioning specifically intercourse with minors, youngling bad videos, anything to do with women of the night, or sexual violence. Kind of weird to have to spell that out if you don't have anything to worry about. Now, this is where I was wondering, well, where was the daughter in all this? Judy is still very much alive. What does she have to say about it? She spent most of her years living with her grandma and not her parents, claiming that it was because her parents were always traveling, so it was the easier and safer option. Her parents told her that they took Judith Penny in so she could have a place to stay and watch their house. But their daughter could have helped watch the house if she lived with them. Just saying.
Number 5. Union Cemetery. In Weston, Connecticut, there is a cemetery that many paranormal investigators and enthusiasts claim is one of the most haunted locations in the entire state. As legend goes, many years ago, a man was driving down the road when a woman suddenly appeared in the middle of the road. The driver didn't have time to stop or slow down and struck the woman, but when he pulled over to try and help the woman, she was nowhere to be seen. Since then, several people have reported seeing the woman in white wandering around the cemetery grounds. Some believe she is a woman who lost her son and is still searching for him, while others believe she may have been a jilted bride who took her own life. Either way, it is a local legend that draws a lot of visitors to the town. Oddly enough, this cemetery is just down the road from the home of Ed and Lorraine Warren, and they claimed to have spent a large amount of time trying to find evidence of the White Lady. In 1990, Ed claimed that while he was staying overnight in the cemetery, he saw the bride. As he described it, "I heard a woman weeping, and I looked out and saw hundreds of ghost lights floating around and forming into the figure of a woman. I couldn't make out facial features." He claimed that he did manage to capture this encounter on video, however. This is of course very exciting, as definitive proof of paranormal activity is rare and could completely change the way people view their own mortality. When asked to show the footage that would validate his claims, Ed said, "No. This is the incident that is least clearly a lie out of all of them on this list, but it is typical behavior from the Warrens, who claimed that they had proof that they then simply refused to show to anyone all the way up until their deaths." Oddly enough, the ghosts of the Warrens sometimes pass through the dark dimension and visit me. I even have a recording of it on my phone that proves I'm telling the truth. You can't see it though. You'll just have to take my word for it. Number 4. The Amityville case. Perhaps the most infamous case the Warrens ever came into contact with. George and Kathy Lutz moved into a house and claimed to experience paranormal activity. A year prior, the house had been the site of a horrible crime, with 23-year-old Ronnie Defoe going from room to room and shooting his 6 family members in cold blood. At his trial, he claimed that voices he had heard on the night of the crime had told him to do it and had controlled his body. But this was not believed, and he was sentenced to 6 life sentences. The Lutz family moved in and reportedly would experience phenomena like unexplained gelatinous drops appearing on their carpet, witnessing each other suddenly appearing to have aged 90 years, doors slamming by themselves, levitating, and waking up every night at 3:15 a.m., the time the murders took place. The family fled soon after and invited reporters and psychic researchers to study the house. The Warrens, of course, showed up, with Lorraine claiming the house was possessed by demons and using the opportunity to get her and Ed on TV, cementing their reputations as paranormal experts, despite not showing any evidence of their findings. The Lutzes published a book about their experiences that was made into a successful movie series called The Amityville Horror, but years later, they would admit that much of the book was highly exaggerated, with much of the content being the result of a creative brainstorming session and 4 bottles of wine. So, much of the activity that the Warrens were validating with their investigation never occurred. But what about the killer saying he had been controlled and forced to shoot his family? Well, years later he admitted that had just been a lie, designed to get him off with an insanity plea. The majority of the lying in this case was by people other than the Warrens, so maybe they were just taken along for the ride. But there are still plenty of examples of them being suspicious to downright hucksters.
Number 3. The Skeptical Society. I think a little healthy skepticism is good for all of us, even on a paranormal channel. I watch paranormal stuff every single day of my life, but I like to approach it from a skeptical angle. What can I say? I'm more of a Scully than I am a Mulder. The New England Society for Paranormal Research isn't the only group in New England that was involved with the Warrens. Enter the New England Skeptical Society, existing as a bit of a rival to the Warrens. The Skeptical Society existed to uphold the tenets of science and reason versus paranormal speculation. The founder, one Stephen Novello, was a prominent neurologist and professor at Yale School of Medicine, and he did not think particularly highly of the Warrens. He was quoted saying, "You meet them, and oh my god, you realize the guy had no idea what he was doing, didn't know the first thing about anything relevant to paranormal investigation or ghost phenomena." He was adamantly not a fan of the Warrens at all, even going so far as to decry their museum of the occult and cursed objects, referring to it as little more than off-the-shelf Halloween junk, dolls, and toys. Now, the Warrens refused to allow the Skeptical Society to shadow them on a case or investigation, numerous times apparently, with various excuses each time. When sufficiently questioned about it, Ed Warren responded, "You can't have scientific evidence for a spiritual phenomenon. An outright investigation by the society printed in a newspaper read, "The Warrens claim to have scientific evidence which does indeed prove the existence of ghosts," which sounds like a feasible claim into which we can sink our investigative teeth. Now, what we found was a nice couple. Some sincere people, but absolutely no compelling evidence. Number 2. The White Lady Ghost. Continuing on with the skeptical society, the frequent detractor of the Warrens, many critics of the Warrens have noted their consistent lack of evidence for their cases. They've got a museum of cursed objects and haunted relics, but they don't seem to have any actual hard evidence of ghosts. The most prominent bit of evidence that they've ever put forward was a photo from the Amityville horror case allegedly depicting a ghost descending a staircase, but there is a lot of evidence to suggest the Amityville case was a fraud as a whole, and should probably be questioned reasonably. One infamous ghost Ed Warren claimed to have seen was that of the White Lady Ghost, a ghost dressed in all white that haunted the Union Cemetery. Stephen Novella repeatedly questioned Ed, saying that if they had this video footage of a ghost somewhere, that it doesn't make sense why you wouldn't release that footage publicly to silence any critics or doubters. Eventually, Stephen was invited to the Warrens' home to watch the tape and was sufficiently unimpressed. Why don't you take a little listen to his review after watching the clip. The piece de resistance of the museum is Ed's video of the White Lady of Union Cemetery in Easton, Connecticut. We've only been allowed to view this tape in the Warrens' home because Ed refused to give it to us to analyze, a common theme in our investigations. The tape shows a white human figure moving behind some tombstones. Like videos of UFOs, Bigfoot, and the Loch Ness Monster, the figure is at the perfect distance and resolution so that a provocative shape can be seen, but no details which would aid identification. Ed Warren has not investigated this video with any rigor and refuses to allow others to do so. Despite Ed's insistence that he was engaged in research, he continued to jealously hoard his evidence rather than allow it to be analyzed. Now, detractors like Novella have suggested that the footage in question has been faked and it was just someone in a sheet. This footage actually is available now. After decades and decades of just talking about it, you can see the footage for yourself. It's available now on their son-in-law's personal YouTube channel after Ed had passed, and I will admit it is a bit blurry. It is kind of hard to make out anything. Number 1. The Amityville Hoax. Now, besides the Conjuring, one of the biggest cases the Warrens were ever involved in was the Amityville horror. Before the Conjuring cinematic universe kicked off and they made 3 Annabelle movies, they were making films and books about the Amityville story. It gripped America as it was a truly bizarre haunting case. Well, except for the fact that there seems like there's a big pile of evidence to suggest the case was greatly exaggerated for the cameras and media. The book was a bestseller and the movie was a hit, but take a listen to some smaller inaccuracies. For one, the Lutz claimed that they found demonic footprints in the snow, but weather records around the time of the incident showed there was no snowfall. The book and the film also both refer to police being called to the house, but no records show that police were ever contacted during this time. Perhaps most incriminating is William Weber, who is the attorney for Ronald DeFeo, has claimed multiple times that the entire story was all a hoax collaboratively created between the Lutz family, novelist Jay Anson, and the Warrens. This wouldn't even be the first time it seemed like the Warrens were more interested in a good story than the truth. The Haunting in Connecticut story was written into a non-fiction novel by Ray Garton, a horror novelist who was commissioned by the Warrens to tell the story. He claims that he found the experience very frustrating as an author because while he was trying to report on the story, the Snedeker family involved in the case could not keep their details straight and were providing several conflicting stories. He pressed Ed Warren on it, and Ed told him, "They're crazy. All the people who come to us are crazy, that's why they come to us. Just use what you can and make the rest up. You write scary books, right? Well, just make it up and make it scary. That's why we hired you." Number 5. The real-life Conjuring movies. Now, the Conjuring films are most likely where most of us know anything about the Warrens from. You know, had they not been made, they might have just stayed local New England legends. Notable for their contributions to a few famous cases like the Amityville Horror or the Haunting in Connecticut, a couple other notable ones. But no doubt it was James Wan's Conjuring franchise that made the Warrens into household names and made them not only iconic characters in horror canon, but storied real individuals. But how involved in the film films, were they, really? Well, unfortunately, Ed Warren passed away before the first one was ever made, so Ed never got to see any of the Conjuring movies. But Lorraine Warren served as a close consultant on them, ensuring that the stories are being presented in an accurate way, accurately depicting the Warrens' relationship as well. Now, of course, there are some liberties taken here and there with the scripts regarding the hauntings, but hey, that's Hollywood. That's how the Hollywood game goes. Fun little trivia for you might not know, even if you're a Conjuring superfan, but the real Lorraine Warren does actually appear in the first Conjuring. I know you're saying, of course she does. She and Ed are the main characters, but I mean the real-life Lorraine Warren is a cameo in the first Conjuring film in a blink and you'll miss it scene. During one of the lecture scenes, you can see her sitting up in the front 2 rows in the crowd. Look for the very old woman who looks about 30 years older than all the other extras. That's the real Lorraine Warren. The actress who plays Lorraine's character in the films, Vera Farmiga, maintained a very close and personal relationship with the real Lorraine Warren, calling her a very close friend. After she passed, on Instagram, Vera wrote, "She lived her life in grace and cheerfulness. She wore a helmet of salvation. She donned her sword of compassion and took a shield of faith. Righteousness was her breastplate, and she has touched my life so." Wow, that is an epic description of like anybody. That sounds like a hero from World of Warcraft, let alone a ghost investigator. And hey, my ghouls and goblins. If you're looking for more scary content, where else could you possibly go? You are already on Top 5 Scary. If you want more stories about the Warrens, cursed items, ghosts, cryptid, aliens, and a lot more, click subscribe and stay scared, okay? Number 4. So what was real and what wasn't? Now, like I just said, The Conjuring is no doubt the most famous story involving the Warrens. But let's take a little look at how accurate the movie was to the real life case. In 1971, the Perron family moved their 5 daughters out to their new farmhouse property and claimed almost immediately after moving in that they began to notice paranormal and supernatural occurrences. The eldest daughter said, "Whoever the spirit was, she perceived herself to be the mistress of the house, and she resented the competition my mother posed for that position. Ookie spooky." So there was a jealous spirit who had some serious spectral beef with Miss Caroline Perron. According to the family, every morning the house would smell like dead bodies. Okay, I've lived in a few places like that. But what was really eerie is that Caroline Perron claims she saw a spirit in her bedroom. "I was in my bedroom about 5 o'clock in the morning when I had the first visit. I opened my eyes and I saw the most frightening thing I have ever seen in my life. It was a very tall woman. Her head was like a sack of cobwebs with little tendrils of hair hanging out." Huh, I'm sorry editors for whatever pictures you're gonna look up for that one. Sounds like they cleaned Bethesda up for the movie, to be honest. Fun fact, Bethesda also was not made up for the movie, because there was a real-life Bethesda Sherman buried nearby who lived next door to the infamous farmhouse. Now, whether or not she was a Satanist and a witch who sacrificed her child, that much we don't know, but there was really a real-life Bethesda Sherman who lived right next door to the cursed farmhouse. Now, probably one of the bigger differences between the film and the real-life case is that in the film, Ed Warren saves the day and heroically performs an exorcism. But in real life, Ed never performed exorcisms as he wasn't a priest and it would be crossing a line. The pair were devoutly religious and believed that those without religion were more likely to be attacked by demons. Now, in actuality in the Perron house, Roger Perron actually kicked out the Warrens, and he said that they were making his wife's health much, much worse. The Perron family stayed in the house for 10 more years, allegedly undergoing non-stop hauntings for a decade. But man, the rent must have been really good.
Number 3 on this list is Judith Penny. Ed and Lorraine Warren were married right up until Ed died back in 2006. The couple had been together for a long time and shared quite the life together. I mean, think about all the crazy things that they did. I highly doubt that many people can say that they stopped ghosts around the world and became famous together. While they were at the height of their success, they looked like a power couple. A real duo that you wouldn't want to trifle with. Ed and Lorraine Warren together taking on the world one ghost or possession at a time. Well, during all of that, although it looked like it was just the two of them, there was actually a third. Judith Penny has come forward and said in a sworn statement that she had a relationship with Ed Warren for 4 whole decades. 4 decades where they were having an intimate relationship that the world had no idea about. Apparently, Judith moved into the Warren household when she was 15 years old back in 1963. Ed, who was in his mid-30s at the time, would sleep with her regularly, and Lorraine Warren was well aware of the entire thing. I mean, she obviously was, considering Judith literally lived with the pair in their own house. In fact, before Ed's big career of being a demonologist took off, it said that he would drive Judith's bus to school. How freaking creepy and gross is that, guys? Literally her school bus driver, but also her lover while she's 15 years old. This relationship apparently went on until 2003, 3 years before Ed finally passed away. Obviously, the Warrens didn't want any of this getting out to anyone and kept it very hush-hush. She even had to have when she became pregnant with Ed's child, and that was kept under wraps. What we thought was this power duo was actually a sick and twisted trio that we knew nothing about. The Warren family, before Lorraine died, came out and said that they had no knowledge of the alleged conduct. Number 2 on this list is the Lady in White. The Lady in White was a ghost that was said to haunt the Union Cemetery in Connecticut. This was another one of the Warrens' most famous cases and gained a ton of notoriety. Well, sorry to burst your bubble, guys, but it's fake. Let's roll a clip of what is supposed to be evidence of the Lady in White. So first off, where the hell is the ghost there, and how on earth did this qualify as proof? Like, frankly, I hardly see anything at all, but even if I did, guess who's behind it? Judith. Yeah, the girl that Ed had an illegal relationship with was the Lady in White, literally dressed up in a sheet, and the pair took some grainy pictures and videos together and claimed it was evidence. Just another secret that the Warrens tried to hide, but eventually it's bubbled to the surface. And finally, number 1 on this list is the smoke and the mirrors. We've already talked about the Amityville horror house and the Lady in White here, and about how they're all fake. Well, guess what, folks? I hate to do this to you, but they ain't the only ones. Everything the Warrens did was just a bunch of smoke and mirrors. This mural haunting saw other experts come in and look at the space. Nothing was wrong with it. Some of the exorcisms they performed, those people weren't really possessed by the devil, they were mentally ill people that the Warrens were preying on. The whole story about how they cured someone of being a werewolf, like, that doesn't even make any sense. Smoke and mirrors. That's what the Warrens' career was. Now, that's not to say that they didn't inadvertently stumble upon something paranormal every now and again. I mean, if you believe in that sort of stuff, then they must have, based on how active they were in the community. But basically, a lot of our favorite stories that rocketed them to the top of the demonology community are completely fraudulent. I guess it's not the worst thing in the world to know that we aren't living among as many ghosts as the pair claimed that we were.
Number 5. Ed Warren's haunted house. Ed and Lorraine probably spent more time inside haunted houses than most people spend inside regular houses. As the world's most storied demonologists, they certainly knew their way around a haunting. Was it their calling, perhaps? Ed Warren would disagree, saying he thinks a calling is something lofty and majestic in his own words, but rather he thought that it was something that in fact guided him to becoming a warrior of the spirit world. Perhaps it was a twist of fate from the start that made Ed pursue his career in demonology, as the first house he had ever lived in as a boy was a haunted house. Makes sense, right? In fact, Ed Warren's first ever reported interaction with a spirit was when he was just a child. The Warren family landlady, who Ed Warren described as not particularly nice, hated kids, dogs, cats, and would sit by the window and yell at neighborhood kids. She lived above them and would pass. Ed describes an encounter when he was a young boy where he went upstairs and saw his closet door swing open by itself. Inside the closet was a small, floating dot of light that began to grow and grow and grow. In a few seconds, the light grew to the size of a person and manifested as the landlady, wearing that same scowl that Ed would recognize. Ed ran down and told his father what he had seen, who had told him to just forget it and never tell anyone. He wouldn't tell, but he certainly would not forget. And Ed Warren credits this incident with being the inciting event to inspire him to research the paranormal and to study the things that live beyond our world. Soon after this event, he would start to be reached in dreams repeatedly by dead relatives he had never met, including including an aunt who would send him messages about his future, offering him guidance, and telling him that one day he would walk alongside priests but would not become one himself. He was attending a Catholic school while also living in a haunted house, a fact which amused him greatly as a boy. He said, although he didn't like going to church, he would pay extremely close attention to lessons about spirits and demons, as he knew it was going to be incredibly important in his life one day. And my ghouls and goblins, if you're looking for more facts and videos about Ed and Lorraine Warren, the cases they've studied, cryptids, aliens, and just about everything weird and unusual, Top 5 Scaries got all of that and then even more on top of that waiting for you. So click on through, find something freaky, creep on creeping on, and subscribe, maybe. Number 4. Lorraine's abilities. Much like her husband Ed, Lorraine would know from a very early age that the spirit world was reaching out to her. Barely even 3 blocks away from Ed Warren, Lorraine lived. Was it fate that had brought them together? Some divine purpose? Or a happy coincidence because they lived pretty close together? Lorraine Moran had a knack for extrasensory perception, and as a young girl had believed that everyone had this sixth sense that they had access to. She didn't know that we're not all psychic. Sorry, Lorraine. At the time, Lorraine was attending a private all-girls academy, and one Arbor Day, the nation's favorite holiday and every child's favorite holiday, her class was planting trees outside in the front, and Lorraine found herself distracted. She describes how as soon as the girls in her class had planted the sapling, she looked at it and saw it not as a sapling, but rather vividly saw it as a completely full-grown tree, with its branches stretching outwards into the sky, its leaves blowing and falling. Lorraine said it was indistinguishable from the real thing, not like a hallucination, like she could see it right in front of her. She said she couldn't even tell that it was a second sight. She was completely lost in the majesty of the tree when her teacher asked her what she was doing looking so intently. She said she had been staring at the full-grown tree. Her teacher, confused, asked her if she was seeing the future, and rather matter-of-factly, Lorraine responded that yes, she was. Although Lorraine thought answering honestly was the right thing to do, she was sent to a weekend church retreat to pray and pray and pray away her delusions. Lorraine learned rather quickly to keep mention of her extrasensory vision to herself, as most people in small-town Connecticut didn't quite understand her abilities. It wouldn't be until she was 18 years old and met Ed Warren that she would find a confidant who understood what she saw and how she could use her gift to help people.
Number 3. Annabelle. The most famous item in the Warrens' occult museum is of course Annabelle. She has featured in the Conjuring films as well as a few movies of her own, and has made people really think twice about buying any dolls secondhand. According to the Warrens, the doll, who in real life is a simple Raggedy Ann doll, not a creepy looking toy like in the movie that no child in their right mind would ever play with, was given to a nursing student in 1970 by her mother. The doll began exhibiting strange behavior, and the nurse and her roommate contacted a medium who said that the doll was being possessed by the spirit of a woman named Annabelle Higgins. The two took pity on the spirit and allowed it to stay in the doll. The doll began escalating its scary behavior. They threw the doll away, but it somehow appeared in their apartment again, leaving threatening notes. The two contacted the Warrens, who told them that Annabelle was really a demon. The Warrens took the doll away and made it the centerpiece of their museum. Of course, there is no documentation of any of this, and we have to just take the Warrens' word on it. However, skeptics eventually noticed that the story of the doll was very similar to an episode of The Twilight Zone that had aired 7 years before. In episode number 126, The Living Doll, a little girl is given a doll by her mother, Annabelle. The girl's stepfather doesn't like the doll, who, when wound up, begins talking to him, telling him that she doesn't like him. Thinking it is a manufacturer's defect, he throws the doll out, but the doll soon reappears and starts leaving him threatening messages until eventually tripping him on the stairs and killing him. The similarities are enough that many doubt the validity of the stories the Warrens have told about Annabelle. Is this an example of the Warrens stealing a story from TV? Or an example of life imitating art in a way that is both terrifying and disturbing, and that could never happen anywhere else but the Twilight Zone? Number 2. The Haunting in Connecticut. In the late 1980s, Carmen and Alan Snedeker and their 5 daughters and 2 nieces moved into a home in Southington, Connecticut, as their oldest son was suffering from Hodgkin's lymphoma, and they wanted to be closer to his doctors. The home that they rented turned out to be a former funeral home, which made the family a bit on edge, but they chose to stay regardless, as it was difficult to find an affordable home for such a large family. Things began getting strange, with objects disappearing, and the children reportedly seeing a man with long black hair around the house. The eldest son began exhibiting strange and violent behavior, and doctors diagnosed him with schizophrenia. His parents decided to consult Ed and Lorraine. They spent weeks in the house to get the full demonic experience and declared that the home was filled with great evil because the morticians who had worked in the home had been practicing necromancy. They performed an exorcism, and things more or less returned to normal. The story would eventually be adapted into the Haunting in Connecticut film, and the Warrens published a book detailing the case called In a Dark Place, which was written by them with the help of horror novelist Ray Garton, who was hired to interview the Snedeckers and shape their testimony into a narrative. When the various family members' stories began to conflict with each other, Ray talked to Ed Warren about his concerns, and Ed responded by saying, "Oh, they're crazy. You've got some of the story. Just use what works, just make it up, and make it scary." Due to this, the entire case has become laced in controversy in the years since, with Garton distancing himself from his involvement with the supposedly non-fiction book. Number 1. The Happy Christian Family. The Warrens made a point of portraying themselves as a perfect, loving couple who supported each other while using their supposed gifts to help people who were in trouble and spread the message of God. This carries over into the Conjuring films that were inspired by their lives, with both critics and fans consistently bringing up their relationship as a highlight of the films, with it often being called one of the best love stories of the horror genre. But in real life, they were not quite the shining example of God's perfect couple that they would have you believe. Lorraine Warren had a very large role in shaping how her and her late husband were portrayed on film, with some very specific demands written into her contract. Frankly, a little too specific. Her contract with Warner Brothers explicitly states that neither Ed or Lorraine Warren could be depicted engaging in a physical relationship with in the Conjuring series. Furthermore, neither the husband or wife could be depicted as participating in an extramarital relationship. But why these extremely specific demands? Well, in 2017, a woman named Judith Penny came forward, saying that when she was 15 and Ed Warren was in his 30s, Ed began a physical relationship with her and moved her into his and Lorraine's home, with his wife's knowledge. When Judith became pregnant with Ed's baby, Lorraine, the supposed staunch Catholic, was the one who persuaded her to terminate the pregnancy to avoid a scandal that would ruin the Warrens' careers. As if that weren't bad enough, Judith claims that while living with the couple, they would argue constantly, with the fight often getting physically violent, with Ed routinely attacking Lorraine into unconsciousness. Not exactly the perfect couple that they claimed to be.